I'm really excited to be back, and thank you for hosting this event again. I've loved coming here over the years, and then each year there seems to be a major theme that ends up happening. This year, apparently, the theme is the word or the number 2.0, because now I'm doing that. So, Joe, thank you for teeing up Programmatic 2.0, and I get to dive into AdTech 2.0. When I found out that he was doing 2.0, I originally wanted to change mine to hold on one sec. I really wanted to change mine to AdTech 3.0, but I don't think we're there yet. So I'm really excited to dive into AdTech 2.0, or T-Mobile's AdTech 2.0. So I'm Director of Media Operations at T-Mobile, and what I support is really how we buy media across all screens and mediums, both offline and digital. How we measure the ad tech we use to deliver a good customer experience or deliver on our business objectives. I joined T-Mobile around 11 months ago when we were at the midst of a transformation in how we were buying media. We had a couple of challenges in terms of how we use data, in terms of the ad tech that we owned, and our solution to that was to take greater ownership over our advertising technology and the partnerships that enabled all of this. So we brought all of that in-house. We built out an ad tech and platforms team that is supporting all of the contracts and platforms themselves, and then we license those or permission those for our agencies to activate on our behalf. So what I'm really excited about is to take you through our journey. To date, it's by no means over. It's very much in flight and very much in progress. And then Kelly and Steve will dive a little bit deeper in terms of how we've actually brought this to life and how this has changed a little bit our thought process and processes at T-Mobile. I didn't want to use a Lumascape, so I put 4 up there because I couldn't find another picture that displayed complexity well enough. So instead of putting 1 Lumascape up there, I decided to throw 4 up there. I don't need to tell all of you that ad tech is complex. You heard it from Joe, you heard it from Steve. I'm pretty sure that every single person that comes up here is going to talk about how complex this ecosystem is. Delivering a consistent and high-quality consumer experience in the midst of this complexity is an incredible challenge for us. Because it's not just about delivering a quality display experience or quality mobile experience or quality video experience. We have one consumer sitting behind all of this, and they need a consistent experience across all of it. That is an enormous amount of fragmentation to deal with. That's an enormous amount of dealing with vertically integrated supply chains and walled gardens and gaps in data, gaps in measurability to try and piece together what should be a holistic view of the consumer across all of this. It makes delivering that experience incredibly challenging. And by and large, I think we've struggled to do that. I think that this is just an eMarketer survey conducted of both marketers and consumers of, are we able to deliver an excellent customer experience? I think this is just one feedback loop. I think we could look at the changing state of our ecosystem and see a lot of different pieces of feedback from consumers around the quality of the experience that they've been getting by and large. It's not great. And there's a lot of reasons it's not great. And when we saw kind of the state of our advertising technology ecosystem, we saw massive opportunity to improve this. But it forced us to stop looking at the problems within the ecosystem, the problems like transparency or the problems like viewability or fraud or auction dynamics as the problem that we needed to solve for. The problem we really needed to solve for was the impact that those things have on the consumer experience. The problem we needed to solve for was improving fundamentally the consumer experience and putting that central to our decision making. So when we looked at poor data quality and we looked at the amount of non-safe inventory we were buying or fraud, or if did we have an actual transparent supply chain, and did we understand our auction dynamics well enough to avoid first price auctions when we were really just targeting second price auctions? These were all leading indicators. These were not the problems that we needed to solve for. These are leading indicators of what is the quality of the experience that we have in market. So if these things are high, we could probably extrapolate that no matter what our performance metrics are saying, the actual quality of the experience by and large in market is going to be poor. So we took a different approach at T-Mobile. We took on greater, as I said before, we took on greater ownership of our advertising technology. And to build a new stack, we needed to ground our decision-making in something that was not only central to our business objectives, but that was truly important for us as a brand. And that was starting with the actual experience that we were delivering. So we did this in a couple of ways, but what we started with was 2 questions that we asked all of our internal partners at T-Mobile. So we went to our creative teams, our legal teams, our strategy and planning teams, our lines of business, everybody that contributed start to finish, not just within AdTech, but beyond AdTech, everyone that contributed to the experience that we were delivering via programmatic and via our AdTech stack. And we asked them 2 questions. The first question was, how should someone feel when they experience our advertising? Not, how many times should they see an impression, not what data should we be using, but how at the end of the day, when they see a TV ad or they see a video ad on their mobile device or they see a banner, how should we want them to feel? Do we want them to feel inspired? Do we want them to feel curious? Do we want them to feel engaged? Do we want them to feel happy? We definitely didn't want them to feel harassed. We definitely didn't want them to feel violated in how we were using their data. We certainly didn't want them to feel vulnerable in terms of the data that they were sharing with us. So it gave us a lot of clarity in terms of what we were actually trying to achieve with our advertising. The second question we asked is, and what does our advertising need to be to create that experience? If we're trying to make someone feel curious, what do we need to be doing to actually spark that curiosity via our advertising? And this grounded, when we actually talked about the needs, what we needed to do, that actually started grounding a lot of our decision making. Instead of it being, we're looking for an ad tech platform that can, achieve the lowest CPM or unlock this inventory source for us or be a point solution for this, it actually started becoming around a greater need of relevancy or a greater need of impactfulness, which was reflected in our RFI and our RFP processes. So again, we organized around that need. That need then became the central focus of what was our ad tech evaluation process, which is still very much in progress. So as an example, let's say we need to be relevant, and that becomes the organizing need that we're using. And this is an example. We have 3 core needs that we extrapolated from that exercise. Relevancy is one of them, but I'm using it as an example here. Well, for us to be relevant, we need the right data, we need the right creative, we need the right buying platforms, we need transparent supply chains, we need the right publishers, we also need the right measurement platforms and business intelligence platforms, so we actually know if we're doing this effectively or not. But the organizing principle around this and the way in which we organize relevancy is the question we're asking of each one of these solutions is not how well they do that function, is does this function or does this platform help us do relevancy better? That's the question at the end of the day at the top of our RFI and RFP processes. That's what we look at when we're actually evaluating them. And that's actually been a huge element of our decision-making process when we've been evaluating ad tech platforms. In addition to organizing around a central need, we applied 3 principles to help us evaluate the efficacy of each platform against that need as well. The first principle that we applied is around simplicity and transparency. I think that these are going to be themes, and again, Steve just talked about it, that your ad tech partners should help you simplify what is a very complex ecosystem. They should help you give clarity. They should help you build line of sight between you and the consumer. They shouldn't be adding to the complexity. If you don't know how your ad tech partners are using data, how their algorithms work and behave, then you aren't really in the control that I think we would all want to be over that consumer experience. Especially that's how we felt. That if we didn't really understand how these things worked, how they treated our data, we couldn't really control the experience at the end of the day. And transparency really dovetails into that simplicity. If we didn't know how all of our ad tech partners were using our dollars, we also weren't in control of that experience. If we didn't know explicitly and directly, not inferred, not extrapolated, but directly how they were making money and how they were using our dollars, we also were not in control of the consumer experience anymore. The second principle that we've applied to all ad tech evaluations is around the idea of relationships, and that relationships are essential. I think the next phase of ad tech is going to be built by relationships, not by solutions. I think that brands have to have relationships throughout the supply chain. And I think that the efficacy of all of our ad tech partnerships are not just how good of a solution they are for that function, but how well they foster collaboration across different ad tech solutions and across our partners, both internally and externally. So how well are these ad tech partners sharing data with each other? How well are they fostering collaboration between our agency teams and our internal creative teams and our strategy and planning teams? How well are they passing data between each other is now a critical point of evaluation in which we look at and evaluate at our advertising technology partners. Because again, like, if we don't have the right relationships in place, we're not in control of the experience at the end of the day. The last tenet or principle that we look at ad tech through is a concept that we call consumer-conscious, data-informed decision-making. Data is incomplete, measurement is incomplete, especially for brands with diversified media portfolios, especially if they span offline and online. The ability to actually, in a deterministic way, tie all of these data points together in a real-time and measurable way is very, very challenging, and data will always be incomplete. If data is always incomplete, then making a data-driven decision is going to be an incomplete decision. Data has to inform your decision-making, not drive your decision-making, and we very much embrace that at T-Mobile, where we always knew that that was going to be a gap for us, and therefore we had to let data inform our judgment in decision-making. And our judgment at the center of our decision-making became central to how we were evaluating ad tech and how we were assessing efficacy or performance. When we say consumer conscious, it's really about infusing our judgment with a sense of empathy for the consumer. What are they experiencing and how are they experiencing it? And at the end of the day, is this an actually good experience regardless of what the data is telling me? I think we've all probably been in meetings where someone has shown you a really, really, really shitty ad, and you've looked at that shitty ad, and you'd be like, that's an awful ad, I don't want to use that ad, but somebody will tell you, oh my God, the performance on this is amazing. That's the moment where you're like, okay, we really have to challenge what we mean by performance and what's performing well and apply our judgment. No matter what this data is telling me, I know this is a bad experience, and we shouldn't be doing this. If we let data drive it, then all of a sudden we start investing in things that we know we shouldn't be, or investing in things because performance is justifying it, though it's incomplete. So beyond these three principles, and then again, organizing around the experience, we did the opposite of the first slide, where we looked at the leading indicators of what a bad experience is. We're now using the amount of control, both with data and creative, the amount of transparency we have, the amount of quality supply side and publisher relationships, the quality of our buying mechanics and how well we're actually able to not only have a clean supply chain, but determine our auction types and determine the actual type of inventory that we're buying as leading indicators of the quality of the experience that we have in market. So we're, again, like using these things not necessarily as problems or solutions, but as indicators of the experience. So I'm really excited to bring up Kellie and Steve, and they're going to talk a little bit more about how we've actually brought this to life. Thank you.
Thanks, Evan.
Yeah.
So let's start with an example. So you're evaluating tech and partners according to this higher value of experience. Give us a good example of how that informed specific decision making and how you actually made a decision to and not to go to a particular vendor.
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the things that we have really embraced at T-Mobile is, while we're creating new teams and new ways of working, we are finding a lot of new opportunities of how we can bring different cross-functional teams to the table so that we are more holistically evaluating for different buying platforms, as Evan was mentioning. So an example that I'll give is we have been going through an evaluation of a buying platform, and we have partnered very closely with our internal analytics teams to ensure that we are sourcing data passback requirements that are going to enable future deep business analytics, measurement, and attribution. We've also partnered with our legal teams on requirements around privacy, which again is dovetailing into understanding the simplicity and the transparency of that particular platform. We partnered with the media strategy teams to understand what are their go-to-market strategies so that we can come back to the table with really good buying mechanics that include things like audience management and access to inventory that's going to drive that relevancy for that message. And we also, again, partnered very, very deeply with our activation teams on the agency side, where we needed to be sure that we were evaluating a platform, knowing that they're the team that's hands-on keys and doing that activation, to be sure that we're understanding what are those overall capabilities around forecasting and planning, as well as general usability, so that when we're going to market, we're able to activate very quickly. And it's something that we've been very excited to embrace at T-Mobile because we're coming together as a cross-functional marketing team. We're not really seeing this as siloed teams anymore. We are one unified marketing group. And we're able to align better on what are those business challenges so that we can deliver better solutions.
Well, then that begs the question, what does this look like internally? How have you reorganized actual people and tasks and communication across what had been silos so that this works?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And what I will say, and leading this into, one of the things that I have learned to embrace, and what I will say as a piece of advice to anybody that's going through this type of transformation, is really committing yourself to the journey. So really what we have looked at is not only just building internal capabilities like what Evan was mentioning around bringing AdTech expertise in-house, but we really want to lean in with each of our different internal and external stakeholders, like I was mentioning about the platform evaluation process. And an example that I'll give, we also recently ran a creative platform evaluation. And we brought in the creative leadership team as well as our agency development partners and brought them along for the journey from the very beginning in crafting what is that overall business case and identifying those opportunities for expanding on creative production opportunities as well as deeper and additional creative development and alongside the business case of what is the total cost savings that we can drive for the business and that efficiency. And because we were able to do that and align ourselves upfront in the ways of working together, we were deeply aligned on what the overall objective and outcome was that we were trying to accomplish, and overall the evaluation criteria in which we were looking at each of these different solutions. And we were able to streamline that overall evaluation and selection process. And truly shocking, even for us as a large enterprise as T-Mobile, we were able to land on a decision cross-functionally with all of these teams within a span of 4 weeks.
So since you mentioned bringing in creative, that's an interesting piece to me, is because ultimately the technology has to serve the message and has to serve, since experience is the thing that you're putting front and center. Tell us about, I know Evan teased that idea of curiosity as one of the key themes you're going after, but tell us about that creative vision. And is creative helping to inform the technology? Is the technology informing creative as to what's possible? How does this change the equation of the tech versus creative?
Yeah, for us, and truly this has really been still a process for us and something that's very much in flight. So I don't have a really concrete example to share, but what I will say is that we have now started to more deeply engage with that team of understanding what are their core challenges from a creative perspective, whether that's with creative insights, any of the data and analytics around audiences that we're reaching, or creative production and just the ability to create digital assets in a streamlined manner. And because we've been able to connect with them and understand what are all the challenges that they are feeling, we've been able to partner with them in helping to manage that process of identifying what are some solutions that can help bring all of those components together. So like for a creative platform, we really are looking at tying the data, creative, and media all together in a holistic view. Again, we're still very much in progress with rolling this out.
Evan mentioned, and this sort of drafts a little bit off of the creative question, Evan mentioned that it's about relationships. And part of that, one of those key relationships is with the publishers, right? So tell me a little bit about how that's changing. Does this mean that you are seeking more direct relationships with those end publishers, those major media companies, less reliant on these technical intermediaries and DSPs, and having a more direct relationship with the publishers? And what do you want back from them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as Evan was mentioning, we really want to be building those deep relationships with the supply side, the SSPs, as well as the publishers directly. What we are doing differently is we are really leaning into our buying platform and DSP relationships and pushing them to become supply relationship facilitators, and how they're able to bring us closer to that supply side conversation. And so we're leaning in and being sure that we're understanding what are the publishers hearing, like how can we better create a transparent supply path, and leveraging the relationships that we're building with the buying platforms to help make that a reality. And really what we want is to bring all of those partners to come to the table together with us so that we are collectively building towards that better consumer experience.
Do you want to reduce the number of relationships or increase them? I mean, that's right. This is the
It is
this
a
is
great
the problem.
question.
This is the problem, right?
I would say it's not even right now about more or less. What we have been really focused on is addressing what are the underlying infrastructure opportunities of the ecosystem, and how are we better outlining what are our business requirements and challenges so that we can better solution moving forward. It doesn't mean necessarily that we're just going to be reducing for the sake of reducing, but it's understanding how are these different solutions leaning into our need states such as relevancy. How are we driving more impactfulness for the consumer experience? How are we more effectively able to deliver that experience?
Do you think, or have you already seen that this actually results in a shift in media spend, where you're actually allocating dollars?
I would say it's less about where we've been allocating dollars and more about where is the future vision of where we need to go from an activation perspective of reaching the consumers where they want to be reached, and how are we able to better control for that, like audience management and experience.
Start thinking of questions, because I'm going to ask Evan to come back up and do a Q&A with everybody in a second. But I have one final question because I'm still trying to get my head around one of the core premises of Evan's model here, which is that this idea that like fraud, transparency, all the problems we've been talking about in events like these for the last 4 or 5 years, they're really a proxy for customer experience. I want to connect the dots a little bit more there. I'm not sure I see that. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about how does ad fraud impact consumer experience? Yeah, I mean, it's a waste for you, and obviously it's a scam in the system, but ultimately, how does all of this really add up to a better or worse customer experience?
Yeah, I mean, as I was mentioning, we are really focusing and addressing what are the underlying infrastructure opportunities that we have, and focusing on creating what is that better consumer experience. As we were mentioning, we really want to deepen those relationships with the supply side and leaning into our buying platforms to help facilitate those conversations in the hope that we can create that more transparent connection all the way down to the consumer. Fraud and viewability are still relevant to be verified, because we do need to understand what that is and how that's impacting our media performance and overall campaign health. However, the focus is that we're going to be building towards a more transparent supply and deepening those relationships, which our hope is that it will result in more quality impressions available to us with quality partnerships from quality publishers that is going to deliver that quality consumer experience.
But I think it's an interesting concept, and I'm very willing to play with this idea. One of the things that really intrigued me about this whole idea is that the junk in the infrastructure we've been talking about for the last 4 or 5 years is actually the real problem when it comes to why digital advertising is still so bad for a lot of consumers. I think it's an interesting concept. I'm really interested in seeing how this evolves. Evan, come on up, and let's take time for questions. Do you have any questions about how these guys are implementing this and what it really means for you? Nope. Right up here. And again, hang on, wait for the mic. And again, when you have a question over the next few days, let us know who you are and who you're with. Number 9?
I can just, oh, there we go.
Beatles fans.
Joe Lux from Beeswax. So you talked a lot about kind of the experience of consumers. I think a lot of that comes back to frequency, making sure you're not overloading them, not underloading them. Have you guys identified like the right cadence with which to address a consumer, and how did you figure out what the right cadence was?
That is a great question. It is something that I think is still an ongoing challenge because, again, data is incomplete in understanding that full view from offline to online. Some of the steps that we have taken overall, and again, I'll give an example, is we have at least started to centralize a remarketing campaign into one evergreen holistic view. Whereas previously, what you can see in the marketplace is that every individual message or campaign is delivering a retargeted tactic within that particular campaign silo, even though you know that audiences and consumers may be across each of those different audience targets within those different messaging buckets. So what we wanted to do as a first step is to remove that siloed retargeting experience where, truthfully, we were probably over-frequencing and cookie bombing our consumers and create at least a more controlled environment where we have that centralized in one campaign so that, again, we can at least correct for what we saw as a poor experience.
Evan, to draft off of that, Evan, you mentioned the stalking problem. How do you solve for that? That's not just a frequency issue. That's also a creative issue, and a retargeting and a general retargeting policy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's the challenge is that those, as we're going to call them, stalking tactics, are one of those things that performs theoretically very well, right? Because you have the clear, like the most recent data. It's the most click-driven tactic that we probably run within our media programs. And it's the most measurable, but that then leads to it being high-performing, though probably low incremental value to the actual business. So something that we've done is really put a focus on incrementality, right? Like we want to be not only looking at what are diagnostic metrics really in terms of click-through rate or actual even site engagement rates. We really want to be understanding what is the incremental value that any of these activities are driving to our business. Because if we're sending somebody, 200 impressions over a 3-day period, that probably has a low incremental value to us as a brand. So I think that taking the lens of what is the incrementality of these activities, how do we understand their efficacy to the business, and asking harder questions of our partners in terms of proving value, I think it's been a huge step forward in our ability to do
What are
that.
some of the other metrics that you're going to be using? Because ultimately, how are you going to be measuring improvement in customer experience?
We're looking at the increase of shopping visits on our site, so the deeper engagements on our site. So if we're driving people to our site that don't really want to engage with us, or we're serving them ads that they don't really want to engage with, then we could probably extrapolate that the amount of engaged traffic on our site is going to drop. So we've been using that as a proxy. But ultimately, it's been about incrementality towards business objectives. And refocusing on incrementality is a primary way of us assessing efficacy of that experience. And to address your first question of, is fraud really not a problem, but it's a proxy of the consumer experience? What I mean by that, and to give more clarity on that, is if we are buying just persistent fraud within our program, what that tells us is not necessarily that fraud is not a problem. We don't need to worry about fraud. If we focus on the experience, fraud goes away. We don't need measurement and verification platforms anymore. What it tells us, though, is that we don't have the cleanest supply chain that we need, that we actually need. We don't have the right publisher relationships in place. And are there other problems within our underlying advertising technology ecosystem that are enabling that fraud or you know what I mean, that are problematic within that fraud? If that's happening, we can also probably guarantee that we're not delivering well-timed or well-managed frequency as well. We're probably not delivering great placements either, right? Like the placements and the quality of the impressions that we're delivering are probably suspect. So we're using these things as indicators, not saying that they're not problems for us to address and deal with and have solutions for, but we're using them as indicators of the quality of the rest of our technology stack to deal with, to deliver an experience.
Over here. Hi, Saki Pasha, LifeLock Norton. So assuming that an ad is not fraudulent, but like you were saying, it's like a crappy customer experience, it looks crappy, but it's performing. How do you balance that against, okay, so this ad is working, we don't want to run it. However, as a media owner with revenue numbers to hit, like I'm sure there's disagreements internally as well. So I'm wondering how you guys kind of deal with that struggle.
I would challenge what the word working means, right? Like part of this is that, a lot of us feel beholden to the performance, right? And then our procurement teams, our finance teams they start benchmarking and forecasting our budgets based off of performance, and then we have to explain quarter over quarter, year over year variations against that performance, and then we become locked into things that we know are not optimal experiences because like the rest of our organization is based around that. I think that it requires an enormous amount of education to those cross-functional partners, to those procurement teams, those finance teams that are helping set up your budgets, that are helping understand and value the efficacy of advertising for the business, that's justifying the expenditure of it, telling them that, like, listen, this performance that we're seeing right now isn't really the most important thing for us as a brand, or it's not the most important thing for us to be looking at. And that requires a lot of work. It requires a lot of meetings, a lot of education. It requires a lot of time to get them on board with that. But it's something that I think is super important.
I think this is going to make. Oh, we have another one. Go ahead.
Andrew Eklund from Cicerone. Great to see you again, Evan. Welcome, Kelly. Is there a dotted line? Is there a direct line to your creative team? Because as we know, great creative sometimes can, in some cases, break the problems that are happening downstream, can make bad technology work. How are you interacting with your creative team, whether it's your agency or internal team, to inform creative? Because sometimes taking a really crappy creative and trying to make magic out of it's not going to happen no matter what.
That's a great question, and I'll just say a top line, and then Kelly can address how we're actually operationalizing this. We just completed a DCO RFP, and the way in which we're going to operationalize this is not as a creative platform that then tags get sent to the media team, and then the media team tries to make magic out of it. It's one platform, and we're going to operationalize it cross-functionally. So instead of there being a creative team and a media team and a data team or a CRM team that sits within this in terms of how we're activating data within this platform, it's one virtual team that sits together, looks at a common data set, and actually collaborates together on what creative should look like.
Yeah, and just to build on what Evan was saying, truly what we have tried to do is partner with the creative leadership at a very early stage, understand what are their overall challenges, and build towards a process and ways of working within this new platform so that we are able to give data-informed decisions back to the creative team so that we understand what is working, what is not working. And again, creating that virtual space for the teams to collaborate in jointly so that we can, again, better be executing and letting the creative teams know that that we are supporting them and that we're going to be able to move this forward and solution for new executions moving forward.
Kelly and Evan, this is going to make a great conversation in the roundtable this morning. I wish you luck. I hope this is true. I hope this works because I think conceptually I'm with it. I want to see. Be really curious in a year for you to come back and show us how this actually played out in actual campaigns. Evan, Kelly, thank you so much.